Hello, Sunshine. I'm ALEXI LALAS, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This week, we'll be talking about MLS is back, and it actually is back this week. We'll be talking a little bit about the Challenge Cup when it comes to NWSL. Mourinho, you can't go wrong with talking about a little Jose and his comments about a lot of things, including VAR. Manchester United, speaking of being back and big and bold again, Bayern Munich, Christian Pulisic, and so much more. But first, joining me as always, my friend, my colleague, my guiding light, David Mosse, a soccer savant and a Fox Soccer researcher and writer extraordinaire. Mosse, how are you on this Monday, July 6th of the year 2020?
I am doing very, very well.
You look great, and I know some people watch this show, some people listen to it, so for the people that are just listening to it, I will let you know that I'm looking at the great David Mosse, and the usual attire when it comes to his headwear is not there. You are wearing a beautiful hat here, Mosse. We know that you're partial to the Izods, or to the, what do you call it? What's the?
Lacoste.
Lacoste, excuse me. Lacoste type of hats. This one has some sort of insignia on the top here. And it's actually, to be quite honest, it's a whole lot nicer than the previous hats that we've seen you in. What are you wearing?
My mother sent me a package recently, and included in that package was this hat, which she bought. It is actually a Novak Djokovic hat. He is my favorite tennis player, but right now is an odd time to be sporting a Djokovic hat. He is getting roasted for having organized a tournament which led to a lot of coronavirus positive tests. So I'm getting looks on the street as if I was wearing like an O.J. Simpson hat.
Look at you, just courting controversy just with what you're wearing on your head. It's a pretty hat. It's got a nice little logo up there for people that can't see it. But so obviously this is out of respect and love for your mom. Everybody, I think, gets that. But what's the statute of limitations? Like, how long do you have to keep wearing this before you feel like you have satisfied a mother-son type of relationship and responsibility when it comes to a gift?
Let me put it this way. I'm planning a trip to the mall in the next couple of days. I am going to go to a Lacoste store and buy a new Lacoste hat because my other one is very old. And once I make that purchase, this will be downgraded to number 2 in the rotation. So you might not see it as often.
All right. Well, that's good. I would love to be a fly on the wall when you walk into the Lacoste store and are looking for hats. I don't think that you're going to find, or you're going to pick something that's out of your your comfort zone, but I hope that you do. I would love to see you in something different. You watching anything out there? I know we talk a lot about what we are watching, and we've talked over the last couple of months about how we're scraping the bottom of the barrel, but anything out there that's tickling your fancy?
A lot of HBO.
Yeah.
We're 3 episodes into Perry Mason. I am enjoying it very much so far. We're taping this on a Monday. Tonight, another episode of I May Destroy You, which is another HBO show I'm really enjoying. I am off and running on the Golden State Killer documentary.
Yep.
We are 2 episodes into that. I did watch a very disturbing documentary last week on HBO called Welcome to Chechnya, which we don't have to dwell on too much because it's really dark stuff. But so HBO kind of carrying me along right now.
So as people that have listened and watched over the years know, my hard and fast rule is I don't watch anything until it's completely done so that I can binge it from start to finish. My family was off and running and binging. Have you heard of this Stranger Things? You ever heard of this show, Stranger Things?
Sure, yeah.
I did not participate in that, and I kind of felt a little left out being in the other room and sticking to my principles when it comes to something like that. They binged it all the way up to wherever we are right now, and I heard all of the rocking and rolling and screaming and yelling and all that. I did hear the 80s part that is very prominent, evidently, in this show, and so much so that there was a point the other day where I heard the Neutron Dance from the Pointer Sisters, which is an 80s song, twice in one day in completely different contexts. One of them was actually in this show that was wafting up the sound that was coming up from downstairs. But I was a little jealous of the communal type of thing with my family. And so we wanted to find something to watch together that, once again, at least fulfilled my criteria of being starting and finishing. And so last night we embarked on what's it called? Lost. You ever heard of this show, Lost, Mosse?
Sure.
So we're starting to get into the Lost thing. We're about I would think a season in right now. It's a it's entertaining. It's interesting. I find myself thinking that even in the first season at a couple points, it's already jumped the shark. But then I hold back and I say, okay, I'm going to give it a little bit longer. But it did hold my attention and my family's attention. So that's what we're going to be doing going forward.
Along those lines, I am thinking of addressing one of the great holes in my TV watching resume. I am strongly considering binging Deadwood, which is a show I've never seen, which some people
That's a Western, right? Isn't that a Western?
Correct. Some people put up there with The Sopranos and The Wire and the HBO canon. And it's always bugged me that I haven't been able to have an opinion on that show because I never watched it. So I am strongly considering the next few weeks binging that show.
Well, I'm sure the Deadwood fans out there and the detractors out there will let you know if this is something you should or shouldn't do. And I will let you know how the Lost progresses. If I can make it to I don't know how many seasons Lost is, but I know it was a very successful show, and it has already kept my attention. I will say that. All right, listen. Enough about what we are watching. We got a full show of all sorts of stuff that's going on right now when it comes to soccer, domestically, internationally, on the field, off the field. Plenty to get to. Mosse, you ready to light this candle?
Yep.
All right. As you know, each and every time on this show, in normal circumstances, in what was once normal life, I would start with my State of the Union. We have said we're not going to do that while we're going through this, and we're just going to dive right into it. And the news this week, it's not news, but it is what needs to be talked about and has to be talked about because this is a big week for American soccer, Canadian soccer, and soccer in general, because Major League Soccer is coming back online in the form of the MLS Is Back tournament down in Orlando. And seeing the way that people have reacted and seeing how this has all come together, Mosse, I think I should start out with saying that first off, it's fascinating to see the way that this is being perceived, both internally by people that are involved in it, people externally, people within the soccer community, people outside of the soccer community, and people, to be quite honest, that are looking at it and are curious and interested to see how this is going to go. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you how it is going to go. But as I said, MLS returns this week in the form of the bubble in Orlando that we've talked about so much. All 26 teams competing in the month-long World Cup style tournament. It all kicks off on Wednesday. Those of us over at Fox will have our part. Our part kicks off on Saturday. ESPN, our friends and colleagues over there, will kick it off on Wednesday. I think it bears repeating that this isn't about finding a fair or an easy or ideal situation. This is simply about making the very best of a very bad situation. And yes, my livelihood is soccer, as is yours, Mosse, as are a lot of the people that we work with, in that we have a vested interest in seeing soccer succeed at all levels, not just the MLS Is Back tournament, whether it's NWSL, men's, women's, all different levels, different leagues, and teams are coming back in different ways as it goes forward. And we have a vested interest in seeing that succeed, but not at the expense of people's health. It's not with blind faith. It's not with any type of willful ignorance, because there is risk. Absolutely. And everyone must decide what that risk is and what the acceptable risk is for them. And there are people, Mosse, that I have seen out there, and it's just kind of human, that are almost hate watching what is going on or what is about to happen, and almost rooting to see the return of soccer fail. And the sobering reality is that this is about surviving, and this is an attempt to limit the inevitable damage to our leagues and to our sport that we have talked about now for a number of months. So this is an all hands on deck type of moment, because we've said this before. soccer is not an essential service, and a future of soccer is not promised to any of us. But there are a lot of people out there, Mosse, in our industry that don't even kick a ball, that depend either directly or indirectly on soccer. And look, many have lost jobs. Many have been furloughed. Many have taken salary cuts out there. And pro soccer is not a charity. We can talk about billionaires and millionaires all we want, but the people who are involved in the business of professional soccer are in it because it is a business. You know, they may love it and they may have passion about it, but it's not a charity. It is a business. And the business of soccer right now is in a moment of crisis. And so I'll end it with this, Mosse. I'll throw it over to you. I want to thank all of the men and women out there, both on and off the field, because there's a lot of people that aren't going to get attention or the credit that they deserve, that have set up these returns when it comes to soccer, and have made the decision that they are willing to risk, and they are willing to go down either to Orlando or to Utah or in market if you're coming back in market. A lot of people that aren't the players that are going to get the attention, that deserve as much credit and many times more credit for what they are doing, because they are answering a call. And in doing so, they are helping the game that we love survive. And so I'm thankful that so many think that the game is worth that risk and are doing it. And I hope that it goes well. I think all of us are keeping our fingers crossed that it goes well and that people are safe. And whether it's MLS is back or the continuation of the Challenge Cup for NWSL or USL coming back or anything coming back online in all sports, but we're talking about soccer right now. We hope that it goes back with the least amount of issues and challenges that we face. But this is the great unknown. We have no idea how it's going to play out. But a referee's going to blow a whistle on Wednesday, Mosse, and this MLS Cup or MLS is Back tournament is going to start, and we just don't know how it's going to end. Mosse, questions, comments, concerns out there?
Well, a couple of bits of news broke this morning. Carlos Vela has opted out of this tournament. He's going to stay with his pregnant wife. And also, one game has been postponed already. FC Dallas, Vancouver, several FC Dallas players have tested positive, so they're in no condition to play a game this Thursday. Listen, my approach here is until I hear otherwise, I'm going to assume this tournament is going to take place. I recognize there's a whole separate conversation going on about the viability of this tournament, and I think it's an important conversation, but I have nothing useful to contribute to it. So I'm just going to focus on these soccer-related stories and talk about that. But it's not because I don't recognize that there's this whole other separate conversation going on. And as far as the soccer end of it, listen, we're only 2 games into the season, so I think you revert back to what the storylines were going into the campaign, which for me was this incredible influx of Liga MX stars moving to MLS, the Rodolfo Pizarros, the Edinson Flores, the Lucas Cavallinis, the Lucas Zelarayans, now Jurgen Damm, Osvaldo Alanis. You had some interesting new coaches entering the league, Thierry Henry, Tab Ramos, Ronnie Dela. We have Yap Stam now in Cincinnati. You have Chicharito, obviously. You have the whole LA Galaxy, LAFC dynamic. You have Atlanta adjusting to life without Joseph Martinez. And you have defending champion Seattle looking like they might even be even better this year, thanks to the addition of my buddy João Paulo, along with obviously Jordan Morris and Rui Diaz and Lodeiro and company. So there's a lot of fun stuff on the field, rivalry games. So I am looking forward to this tournament. And like you, I hope it goes off without any great incident.
Yeah, and neither of us or any of us out there are blind to the risks and the realities out there. And yes, I am jacked up to be able to see Major League Soccer again, and obviously to work when it comes to what we are doing with Fox. As it relates to Carlos Vela, this is not necessarily a surprise. This has been rumored a long time. His wife is pregnant, and it has to be said that the option exists for players to opt out of this tournament for whatever reason that they feel. There are players that are in similar situations that are in Florida. There are players that are, compromised when it comes to their health that are in Florida. There are certainly players that are making a whole lot less money than Carlos Vela that are in Florida. In Florida, everybody's got to make their own decision as to what the risk is and how much of that risk is worth taking in order to do something like this. It sucks that the number one player and the biggest star in Major League Soccer is not going to be there. But as you said, there's plenty of other wonderful players to see in this unique type of setting. The production, which we've talked about a lot over the last couple of months, is going to be different because of the circumstances and the location down there in Orlando, not being in an actual home stadium and not even being in a traditional type of stadium setting. ESPN, there's a bunch of articles out there. They're gonna do a great job because they're spending a lot of money, lots of cameras, lots of microphones. You're going to get access, the likes of which we haven't had even in normal times. But I think there's also going to be a compare and contrast with how ESPN does their production of it, how we do it over at Fox. And keep in mind, we are taking their feed in terms of the pictures that we are taking. But everybody does it in a different way. And I'll be really interested to see the reaction of people, once again, relative to what has happened with over in Europe and obviously Bundesliga, EPL, all the different leagues, even what's happened with NWSL in a much more, they're in a bubble, but they're also playing in a smaller type of stadium setting. And the virtual type of reality and graphics and pictures and optics that ESPN is going to have, what, if any, type of enhanced either audio or video things that they bells and whistles that they throw on, because it's an opportunity, and that compare and contrast it will happen. There's the all of the talk off the field of, like you said, Mosse, is this the right thing to do? Is this the right way to do it? And ultimately how this is going to progress. The players are in a bubble. Can that bubble be punctured? Absolutely. Okay. But I do think that there is a part of me that looks at it and says, these, as we said, it's not without risk, but they are in a bubble where they are tested on a continual basis, much more so than 99.99999% of the people that are out or returning to the workforce are. They are, once again, in that bubble. And so there is a controlled element of who is in there. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is a controlled element. By the way, much more than 99.999% of the people returning to the workforce. They are exposed, and they are privy to medical help on site, the likes of which 99.9% of the people out there aren't availed of. So all of that is to say that I do believe that the protocols that have been in place are going to protect players, but it could very easily go sideways. I don't want it to, and I don't think anybody wants it to, but I think that in a risky proposition, MLS has done everything from their side to make these men and women, and it's men and women, once again, it's not just the players on the field, it's everybody that it's involved, be as safe as possible with establishing those protocols and hedging your bets. And people will say, well, it's just soccer. Yeah, it is. Okay. And in the greater scheme of things, it means nothing. But even in the scheme of things, when it comes to sports, we know that soccer is very low in terms of relative to other sports out there. And MLS, when it's just soccer, while it may be at the top, all those other leagues that are coming back online, okay, relative to MLS soccer are different. So as I said before, I think about all the people that have chosen soccer, and you can say you should have chosen something else, but have chosen soccer to be their business and their livelihood. It's how they feed themselves. It's how they feed families, directly or indirectly. That, this is our industry, and this is an industry in crisis right now, and doing things in order to have that industry at some point in the future return to whatever new normal it is and get back on track moving forward, I don't think that you can fault people for wanting to do that just because you don't like soccer, or you don't like sports, or just because we all admit that it pales in comparison of importance to other things out there, doesn't mean that doing things in your own self-interest to help you and your chosen vocation, your chosen industry succeed and survive, as I said, in this moment. I think that that's human. I think that is expected. And I hope, as I said, that we get to a place where everybody is back playing in their home markets and the people are safe. But, Florida, the way you look at Florida right now, it's going to be very, very interesting. There's going to be a lot to talk about as we go forward. All right. Anyway, that starts on Wednesday, as I said, on ESPN. Our coverage starts on Saturday on Big Fox. Yes, we got Atlanta versus the Red Bulls. That is at 8 o'clock Eastern time on Big Fox. And then we got the Hell is Real Derby, whatever you want to call it. It's Hell is Real. Cincy versus Columbus, also on the 11th of July, which is Saturday, at 10:30 Eastern time on FS1. And you mentioned, I think you touched on Jürgen Damm a little earlier. Signings are still happening. Most of the players that are signed can and will participate in this tournament. Not all of them, but there are some people out there that are looking at this as an opportunity and doing some things interesting, very, very interesting things when it comes to signing players. Jürgen Damm, Mexican international, a player that, shall we say, has not lived up to the hype, but still a quality player and an interesting addition when it comes to a team like Atlanta, which is looking for that kind of stuff. Mosse.
Well, the only thing I'll add is they did tweak the format of the tournament since we last spoke. Group A has 6 teams. Groups B through F have 4 teams each. And initially, it was going to be the top 2 from each group that would advance. They've tweaked that where the third place team in Group A now also automatically advances to the knockout stage. And then the 3 next highest ranked teams in the group stage also advance, which will give you 16. A change that makes sense. People flagged that right away. They said, wait a minute, that's not right. Why does a group with 6 only get 2, same as groups with 4? I will be curious to see if teams are going to buy into the tournament aspect of this tournament. I mean, is a club going to go into its last group game saying, well, we only need a draw to advance, so let's play for a draw? Or are they just going to play their 3 games straight up and whatever happens, happens? If they don't advance, frankly, they're happy to get out of there and go home and they're not going to be bothered by it.
Well, I think there has to be a short-term and long-term philosophy when you are playing this tournament, because as you mentioned, let's say you get to that 3rd game and let's say you play to advance in the tournament. That's all fine and well. We know there's $1.1 million prize money, and there's the carrot of going directly to CONCACAF Champions League, assuring a CONCACAF Champions League spot. But keep in mind also that group stage counts to your regular season. And look, if it goes well or if it doesn't go well, it's still going to start and end. And then teams are going to theoretically go back to their home markets, and the season is going to continue, and then there's going to be playoffs, and then there's going to be an MLS Cup. We know not in front of fans, at least for the foreseeable future. But your group stage results will matter. And so if you look at it as, let's just get to the next round, that's all fine and well, but you're leaving points on the table possibly. If you don't get that 3 points, or if you only get 1 of the potential 3 points when you could have had 3, who knows at the end? Maybe those 2 points are the ones that leave you out of the playoffs. So I think, yes, you have to think about it in terms of a tournament, but you also have to think about possibly amassing, for example, Minnesota United, which started off the season great and sitting in first place. They could come out of this tournament losing all 3 games and being right back at the bottom of the standings, still with plenty of games to go. But I think you really have to. I don't think that you're necessarily looking at this with the traditional type of tournament mentality that teams have in a World Cup setting. That's a good thing, though. That is a good thing, because you're almost battling on 2 fronts, and that I think is going to increase the competition, and I think it's going to to make teams do things that they otherwise wouldn't do in a tournament setting.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think the fact that the group games count towards the regular season and the knockout games don't sort of undermines that traditional tournament mentality. Absolutely, I agree with you.
And we'll finish it here. As we start watching these, and I already have some Zoom drinks in line this week in the games and the nights that we're not doing anything from Fox. So I will be watching it with a healthy beverage. Healthy, not that it's good for you, but healthy in terms of amount. And I will be looking at this, and I think it is fair to hold these players, hold these teams, hold these organizations to account, despite the unique and very, very different and challenging circumstances that they are in. And we are going to find out who is able to adapt, who is able to be flexible. And it might be teams that in normal days we never thought about. And so if a team like Orlando just all of a sudden comes out of it and is this revelation within this tournament, MLS is Back tournament setting, does that mean then that they have turned a corner, or is this just this anomaly? But I do think that it is fair to expect teams that are good to be good in this setting and to adjust. The reason why you are good is because you have obviously good players, but you also have a good staff that prepares you. And I think that there will be teams that are licking their chops for the opportunity in a new setting to almost add to their legacy. So if LAFC, by the way, without Carlos Vela, and Bob Bradley come in and they are the cream of the crop again, that's another feather in the cap of what they are doing. And it deserves praise. Likewise, if someone like LAFC comes in and stinks up the joint for whatever reason, they deserve the criticism, and they deserve to be looked at as they weren't prepared. And I think it'll be too easy to say, yeah, but this is just this different, unique challenge. No, figure it out. You're professionals. You are, wonderful players, and you got to be able to figure it out in this type of bubble. All right, Mosse, enough of the bubble. As I said, starts Wednesday. I can't wait for it. I'm so excited for it to return and to be able to watch Major League Soccer again. We mentioned a little bit how NWSL continues to roll along with the Challenge Cup out there in Utah. Plenty of wonderful goals, wonderful games, wonderful players. I think it is going as well as NWSL would have imagined. Plenty of attention. Some of it, obviously, with what went on off the field and the anthem situation, being on big CBS, all of that kind of stuff. I think that so far, so good when it comes to the NWSL from a health and safety perspective. Very, very few, if any, problems, and most of them have been relative to just injuries actually on the field and that kind of stuff. You still have the Courage, which is a juggernaut of a team, and like I said, the cream of the crop, and a team that has been able to transfer that form that they have in a normal situation to this unique situation, which says a lot about the coaching and which says a lot about the players. 3 wins in their 3 matches. Anything NWSL, Mosse, before we move on?
No. Yeah, from what I can gather, it's been very successful. MLS can only hope to be for its tournament to go as smoothly as the NWSL one is going so far. Absolutely. Absolutely.
They have, and once again, I'll end it with this. The men and women, that have organized these tournaments, whether it's NWSL or whether it's down in Orlando. And, I've spoken to people down in Orlando. There are people down there that are doing not just their job, but other types of jobs. All right. Your job description gets thrown out the window. That's why I said this is all hands on deck. And there is staff that has been down weeks before to make sure that it is as good as it can possibly be, and are working their asses off to put this together. And this is unprecedented. All right. There's no template. There's no, there's nothing that they can reference. either in history or in their history. And they are down there doing that. And so, as I mentioned at the top of this segment, I want to thank everybody that that is doing this and that is down there and is working for their league, for their team, and for their sport. And it does make a difference. And I hope that people are staying safe. And I just want to make sure that they understand that they are praised and they are appreciated for everything that they are doing, and that they will continue to do as these teams, leagues, and ultimately sports come back online, because it's not just limited to soccer. All right, Mosse, we're going to take a little break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk some EPL and some Europe, all sorts of different things that are going on over there. All right, moving on. All right, welcome back. We're going to go right to England, Mosse, and we're going to go right to the gift that keeps on giving. Let's be honest. Jose Mourinho, right? A legend, both in terms of his managerial and coaching prowess, but also a legend in terms of the sound bites and the narrative that he continues to churn. He is a lightning rod. He is a manager that as many people love as loathe. And when it comes to expressing his opinion and oftentimes his reaction to things that have happened on the field, he never fails to deliver. And as was the case again this weekend with his Spurs team and the VAR part of the game. Give folks a little synopsis of what happened, and then we'll get into the ridiculousness of it.
Well, in the first half of Tottenham's 3-1 defeat to Sheffield United, when they were trailing 1-0, they scored an equalizer, Harry Kane, and the goal was wiped out by a handball, Lucas Moura, in the build-up to the goal. VAR spotted it, so they wiped the goal away. And Mourinho went on something of a rant afterwards about it. And to be fair, he raised two issues that many others have raised as well, which I'll throw out to you. First off, I've heard a lot of people say, look, if the VAR assistant tells the referee on the field, hey, you need to take a look at this play again because something might have happened here. The referee runs over to a monitor, sees it, and he decides to change the call. I've heard players and managers say they can live with that, but they find it problematic when the referee on the field just trusts the VAR official, and there's something about that blind faith they don't like. They would prefer to have decisions in the game ultimately determined by the referee on the field. Do you think that's a fair criticism of VAR? If you were playing in a game, would you find it a little weird that somebody that's not there, that you can't communicate with, that you can't get a real explanation for why they made the call they made, is ultimately making these decisions?
What I understand what they're saying, but really what they're saying is we would rather have performance art to make us feel better, because that's what it would be. Okay? If you just feel better because the referee runs over to the screen, fine, but that's just an act of doing it, okay? That is just going to make you feel better. I have no problem with them trusting their colleagues, okay? And by the way, their colleagues with however many cameras you have, so that many more types of angles and that much more informed on a situation than just the two eyes of the person that was on the field. Look, the VAR situation, first off, the VAR situation in this particular moment, let's just state it out there. It was not a wrong call, okay? You may have a problem with VAR, but your problem really is with the laws. If you want to change the laws, have at it. No problem with that. But to get angry at either the person on the field or indirectly the people off the field or directly the people off the field because they made a correct call that you just don't happen to like, that's ridiculous. The whole point of VAR was, let's get the call right, okay? And I know there's a lot of talk about clear and obvious when it comes to this. The reason why it is clear and obvious is because of the technology that these men and women upstairs or in another room or in another city have at their disposal, that they can see it, that it may take multiple looks or multiple angles, Okay, it doesn't change the fact that there is clear and obvious evidence that this is a wrong call or this is a right call, whatever it is out there. So, look, if you want to change the law when it comes to the handball law, then go ahead. But
well, that is the second issue. So recently they did make this change to the handball rule where, mind you, for a defender, there's still an interpretation there and whether the hand was in a natural position and the silhouette and all the rest. But for an attacking player, they removed any sort of gray area. If the ball hits the hand of an attacking player and you build up to a goal, it's not a goal. And we saw the Tottenham goal waved off. We also saw, it didn't matter because City were winning 4-0 anyway, but in their 4-0 win over Liverpool in the last play of the game, Riyad Mahrez scored a goal to make it 5-0. That got wiped away because of the ball hit the hand of a City player in the build up to the goal. And a lot of people, especially attacking players like Gary Lineker, they didn't like that rule change. They feel like there's an inconsistency there and that it's harsh on attacking players. So what do you make of where we stand with the handball rule right now?
As I said before, just make it, if it hits your arm or your hand, it's a foul. All right, that's it. Clear cut. Then we look at it, and if it happens, it happens. But here's the other thing. When someone like Mourinho, okay, the coach of Spurs, points to this moment, how fragile, okay, and whether he realizes it or not, how fragile he looks as a coach. If this result was predicated all on this moment happening, because this had nothing to do with tactics, this had nothing to do with coaching or managerial acumen, okay? This was one of those things that it's going to go either way. You're not training for this moment to have the guy fall down, hit off his arm, fall to Harry Kane, and have Harry Kane score the goal. All right, this is just serendipity. So to feel aggrieved as a coach because this perfect star alignment that you have nothing to do with when it comes to coaching didn't or did happen, that's a little rich for me, Mosse.
Yeah, I think the larger issue here is if you look at the proverbial big six in England, Liverpool and City are juggernauts. There's tremendous excitement surrounding Manchester United and Chelsea. Even Arsenal are showing signs of progress under Arteta, and there's some room for optimism there. And then you have Spurs, who not long ago were in the Champions League final, moving into a new stadium, and it's unbelievable how stale it's gotten so quickly. It already felt stale early on the season under Pochettino. And then, in my opinion, they've doubled down on the staleness by bringing in Jose Mourinho, who is already cutting this depressed figure. He already gave this interview recently in this tone of resignation about how they're not going to spend any money this summer. He was talking about the money that Chelsea are throwing around and buying Werner and Ziyech. And he said, well, we're not going to be able to do anything like that. It's going to be more or less the same roster for us next season. So there's already this sort of vibe there that, and then you throw this VAR thing on top of it. I mean, Mourinho already is sort of brought that sort of toxic vibe that he's become his hallmark in recent years. Just
when you think they couldn't get any more stale, they are more stale. All right, so then that brings us to the question. We'll finish it here when it comes to Jose. Has the game passed him by? Because we know this is his shtick. This is what he does. This is what you pay for. But oftentimes he's coupled it still with winning, albeit some very ugly winning at times. But you know what you are getting.
I've said this before, and then we can transition to his former club, Manchester United. But I'll say it. Last thing for Mourinho and Tottenham, where I think we're headed is if he spends the next 2 or 3 years there, he is going to win a secondary trophy somewhere along the way, like a League Cup or a Europa League. Mm-hmm. And then Mourinho devotees will argue that Pochettino won nothing, Mourinho won something, so by definition he was better, while others are going to point out that in the two competitions that really matter, the Premier League and the Champions League, Spurs finished second in the Premier League under Pochettino and got to a Champions League final. I don't think Mourinho is going to come close to that in those competitions. And so how can you say he was better? And so wherever you land in that, I would start getting your arguments ready because I can just smell it. I think that's where we're headed. 2-3 years from now, we're going to be arguing the value of winning a League Cup versus not having won anything but have come close in the competitions that really matter.
But has the grumpy old man routine gotten old and stale for you? I know the play is stale, but him, for me, it hasn't. I still love it. I watch. It's not stale. It is one. Speaking of performance art, it's wonderful performance art for me, and I don't mind it.
For me, it has gotten stale. I just think earlier in his career, there was more of a charm to it. There was more of a wit. And now he just cuts this sort of
That's
grunt.
fair. That's fair. That's fair. All right. Well, let's move on to a team that once was stale and not anymore? Question mark? Not anymore? I mean, is this for real, Mosse? Are they coming out?
I win on Manchester United. Love what I'm seeing from them. They were playing great before the play was halted. And the big question mark coming back for me was whether he could get Pogba and Bruno Fernandes to play well together in the same midfield. And he's done that. And they have this, and by he, I mean Solskjaer. And they have this very exciting young front three with Martial, who's really, really come good, Rashford, and then Mason Greenwood, who is another talented English player to burst on the scene. It's amazing how England have been pumping out players the last few years. There's now like different waves of them. You have the initial wave was like Rashford and Sancho and Alexander-Arnold, and you can even throw Phil Foden into that. And now you have like the second wave of like Greenwood and Saka. You even have guys like Sterling and Dele Alli still, who are only in their mid-20s. So England are well stocked for the next few major tournaments, the next couple of World Cups. I think they're going to be contenders to really win the next couple of World Cups. They already got to the semifinal in 2018. So that's part of the story too. We can talk about it, how much young talent England have. But yeah, United benefiting from the emergence of Greenwood alongside Rashford and Martial, and you still might throw Sancho into this mix, which is like, my God, how much young attacking talent can you have? So there's still work to be done there. They need to make another couple of signings this summer, I think, to get up to that City, Liverpool level, but they're on their way. I think Manchester United are really on the right track again.
How much, I guess, for lack of a better word, credit does Ole Gunnar Solskjaer deserve? In that, is this just a natural type of progression? And I mean, because it'll be framed as patience. And while everyone was screaming and yelling, we were patient and we believed in it, and we kept the course and did all that. Is that true? Is that fair? Or would this have happened regardless? Or if somebody else had come in, would it have happened quicker?
No, I have to say, I give him a lot of credit. I think he's proven to be the right manager there. I had my doubts, but he really is doing a terrific job. The way these young players are coming along, and like I said, the way he's figured out a way to get the best out of Pogba alongside Bruno Fernandes in that midfield. So no, they are playing exciting football. It's good times for Manchester United. Now, I mentioned Sancho and Phil Foden. I do want to make a point about that, if I may.
Yeah.
Jadon Sancho and Phil Foden played together in the Manchester City youth system. And we know how difficult it can be for young English players to get on the field for these big Premier League clubs, particularly City. Sancho decided he didn't want to deal with that, so he went to Dortmund. It's worked out great for him. He's played regularly the last 2 seasons, blossomed into a star. Under normal circumstances this summer, he would have been like a €100 million player. It might not be that much because of the pandemic. While Foden chose the other route, to stick it out, to learn under Pep, to trust that his time would eventually come. And I must admit, at different times in the last couple of years that Foden sat on the bench, I was one of those people that questioned that decision and held up Sancho as an example, and why not do what he did? And there are others like Arlo White that said, no, Foden is doing the right thing. And I have to say, we've reached a kind of inflection point now with Phil Foden where he's clearly ready. And if Pep goes out and buys a couple of midfielders this summer and Foden is still struggling to get on the field regularly next season, I think we can conclude that it was a mistake to stay. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. He's gotten a nice run of games the end of this season. He's playing very well, and I think this is going to carry over into next season. He's going to have a big role to play next season, starting fairly regularly, and is going to emerge as one of the best midfielders in the Premier League. I love Phil Foden. I think he's a major talent, and if things play out the way I think they're going to play out, then I have to say he is kind of vindicated. I mean, him and Sancho chose different paths, but you could say that it kind of worked out for both of them, and they're going to intersect next season perhaps as being two of the big stars in the Premier League.
But Jadon Sancho, in a strange way, in a mirrored way, benefited from being a different nationality in the Bundesliga. So what I'm saying is, to your point, if Pep goes out and buys a bunch of new players and Foden doesn't play, is it because he's not as good as the new players, or is it because of his nationality?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think, listen, he's ready right now. There's no doubt in my mind if Phil Foden was like a regular week in, week out starter for City next season, he'd, like I said, blossom into a star, be one of the best midfielders in the Premier League. So if Pep still feels the need to go out and buy a couple of flashy foreign midfielders and they play ahead of him, I think it does speak to this mentality, this reluctance to give young English players a chance that would really bother me, because I don't need to see any more from this kid to know that he is absolutely ready right now. And to me, it would just be stubbornness on their part if they're not ready to sort of hand the keys to him. And David Silva's leaving this summer. He's out of contract. So, I mean, to me, the future is now for Phil Foden. So I really – and by the way, if I'm right and he gets on the field regularly for City next season and plays well, then he's going to likely carve out a big role for England. He could be starting in that England midfield by the next World Cup in 22. I really believe that. I'm a massive, massive Phil Foden fan.
Well, England's going to be loaded, like you said. A lot of good players, which means they're definitely going out in the group stage. All right, let's transition over here to La Liga. La Liga continues to roll along. Anytime you talk about La Liga, you start off with one of two things, and we're going to start off with Barcelona. Go ahead, Mosse. What do you got to say about Barcelona?
Well, I'll mention Barcelona in the context of Real Madrid, because Real Madrid are inching towards the title. I said on this podcast a couple weeks ago that neither one of these teams was good enough to rip off several victories in a row. Right. Real Madrid have won 7 out of 7 since the restart. So that's the kind of analysis you get on the State of the Union pod here. But their latest victory was 1-0 over Athletic Bilbao on a penalty that was earned after a VAR review. VAR has also been a big theme in Spain. Real Madrid have benefited from some calls here, so Barcelona folks are sort of already drumming up conspiracy theories. But nevertheless, Real Madrid are 4 points clear with 4 rounds remaining, and they have the tiebreaker. I will say, though, Barcelona kind of saved the match point this weekend because they took the field against Villarreal 7 down. If they had lost or drawn that game, it would have been completely over. And instead, I'll give them credit. They stepped up. They turned in a big-time performance. Setien made a tweak in the formation. He started Messi as kind of a traditional number 10 behind Suarez and Griezmann. It worked. They all combined very well, scored some beautiful goals. They won 4-1. And so it's probably a little too late for La Liga, but in thinking in terms of the Champions League, Barcelona might have found something here formationally. Keep in mind, this is all occurring against the backdrop of this Messi story that broke this week, which initially it was a radio station that reported it, but other reporters who I trust have kind of backed it up. So I think it's real. And the story goes that Messi has halted negotiations on a contract extension with Barcelona. His contract runs out in the summer of 21. Barcelona are going to have presidential elections between now and then. And he kind of wants to wait and see what happens and who wins and what the overall direction of the club is before he decides to pledge his future to them, which is fascinating. Keep in mind, the guy who's the president now can't run again, but presumably somebody from his camp will run. And then there's this opposition candidate who's already announced who Xavi has aligned himself with. So people think one of the reasons Xavi hasn't taken the coaching job yet is because a big part of this guy's campaign is going to be, I can deliver Xavi as the coach. And so Xavi doesn't want to undercut that by taking the job already while this regime is in place. So there's this whole political thing swirling around Barcelona right now, which could impact Messi's future. And in the meantime, here they are trying to still win a La Liga title and the Champions League title this season.
Wow. All right. So 2 questions. One, Setien, do you think he ultimately retains his job or is he just a lame duck right now, unless they win Champions League or something like that?
Yeah, unless something really out of the ordinary happens, I don't think he's long for that job, no.
Do you think Messi cares? Will he show him to the parking lot? And
yeah, I don't think Messi cares much about Setien's future. I think Messi is concerned more with the transfer business they've done the last few years. And there's a lot of talk at Barcelona that, it's that old thing that comes up when clubs are struggling, that like, we need more football people making the decisions. And so this opposition candidate's whole thing is that I'm going to bring in Xavi as a coach and guys like Puyol for the front office. And we're going to have football people making football decisions. And so I don't know where Messi's head is at with that, but if he buys into that, then he's going to sort of wait around and see if this opposition candidate wins. And if things unfold the way, some of his former teammates are making the decisions, he might feel better about that than the people that are in charge right now.
Well, take it from me. Sometimes football people are the dumbest people in the room. All right, my last question then would be, and this is an evergreen type of question, with all of this talk, when Messi does something like this, inevitably people start talking about the what if. Do you ever, in your wildest dreams, see Leo Messi in anything but a Barcelona jersey?
I think there's a much better chance than not that he stays. But I think he is so disillusioned with that Barcelona front office that it's at least opened the door slightly for him to leave at some time in the next couple of years. And then the question would be, would he seek out another big European club, or would he be ready at this point to move on to a different phase of his career, which could mean Inter Miami, which could mean going back to Argentina, playing for Newell's Old Boys, something like that. So that'd be sort of the question if he were to leave, which I don't think is going to happen, but that would be the question that he would have to decide.
Speaking of bubbles, he'd have to, bust out of that bubble and that cocoon that he has been living in for so long. It's a wonderfully warm and productive type of cocoon out there. So, all right, Mosse, anything else?
Well, let me just end on Serie A, which, by the way, Alex Dowd has left out of the rundown the last 3 weeks. I had to beg for it to get put in this week. Alex Dowd has some issue with Italian football. That
doesn't like it. He doesn't like Italy. He doesn't like the entire country of Italy. That's it.
Well, what happened this weekend? Juventus hammered Torino 4-1, while Lazio and Inter both lost. Lazio got drilled by AC Milan, while Inter lost at home to Bologna. And so what that means is Juventus have opened up a 7-point lead over Lazio, 11-point lead over Inter. And, I was thinking about this the last couple of days. Serie A folk like Matteo Bonetti have spent so much energy the last few months trying to sell you on the fact that Lazio and Inter were legitimate contenders to Juve. And now it looks like Juve are not only going to win a 9th straight Serie A title, but might actually win it by a comfortable margin. And my first instinct is to kind of roll my eyes at that. But then I'm self-aware enough to take a step back and say that's exactly what we've sounded like the last 6 months with Dortmund and Leipzig challenging Bayern. So I think folks that cover those two leagues right now are just struggling to accept like what those leagues are. And, you just want somebody else to win it. And wishful thinking is masquerading as analysis right now. And we're trying to talk ourselves into these other teams. And then invariably you end up disappointed at the end of the season.
Well, I love the fact that your first initial reaction was to find somebody to criticize and ridicule and make fun of. Not surprising, but then, your bigger self came into play and you understood that in essence, you would be pointing right back at not only you, but all of us that are just dying for it to be broken up, whether it's in Serie A, whether it's in the Bundesliga. That's what makes leagues fun. That parity that, to be quite honest, doesn't exist in a lot of places out there. But when it does exist, it makes it that much more interesting. Nobody wants to see somebody run away with it. Even if it's your team, you want to be challenged. And it makes it for a better viewing experience going forward. But it doesn't look like there's an end in sight right now. And certainly the usual suspects, when all is said and done at the end of this season, are standing again. All right, that's it from over there in Europe. When we come back, we'll be talking all sorts of different things in our Ask Alexi segment, using that hashtag Ask Alexi. All right, don't go away. Okay, it's time for Ask Alexi. Use that hashtag Ask Alexi or Ask Mosse out there, and you send us some questions or comments and concerns out there, and we go and pick them off of the social media platforms. And what do we got this week, Mosse? What do the people want to know or talk about this week?
First up, at UK Footy 2019, Christian Pulisic is doing well over here. Are there any more U.S. talent we should be aware of?
So, I think this is relative to the next move of a player to the EPL. And right now, the traditional stepping stone, if you will, is to go to the Bundesliga and then to go to the EPL. And that's certainly certainly the path that someone like Christian Pulisic has blazed. There's been others in the past that have done it, but certainly not to the extent and with the fanfare that Christian Pulisic has. I think the next one in line, if you will, to consider that move or to be considered for that move from others would be someone like Weston McKennie. He obviously is one, if not the best player on Schalke, a team that struggles. I think he would be open to it, and I think Schalke would be open to it. It just, as we've said before, remains to be seen what that price is on Weston McKennie. Given the challenges, both in the practical challenges of work permits when it comes to players over there and American players over there, and just we talked earlier about how the culture and the conscience views players and the way that they view American players, and it's not very high, let's be honest. It makes it that much more difficult for players to go directly there, which is why we're seeing this stopover, if you will, in the Bundesliga. And I'm not saying you can't have a long and productive career in the Bundesliga and make plenty of money and be very, very successful. You look at someone like, Steve Cherundolo, but the allure and the lure of the EPL is strong, and it's not fading anytime soon. So, a guy like Weston McKennie, who very publicly has said that is one of his goals, is to play the EPL, and I completely get it. You look at a guy like Tyler Adams right now is interesting because he's in that Red Bull system, and we've seen Timo Werner go now, so that certainly could be something. And while I don't think he said it very, very publicly, I would think that for Tyler Adams, that is the end game, is to get to the EPL. Now, just getting there for these players is one thing. Getting to a place where you're going to play and that is comfortable and that is not a sideways or backwards type of step, because not all EPL clubs are created equally. That's another thing. So they have to be very, very selective when it comes to, for example, if the offers on the table for a Weston McKennie were, you can upgrade in the Bundesliga. Let's say the money was the same. You can upgrade in the Bundesliga from going to Schalke, and you can go to a higher, more prominent Bundesliga club. And let's pick a Red Bulls. Let's say the Red Bulls or RB Leipzig said, we want Weston McKennie, and I don't know, give me a mid-level type, give me a mediocre to struggling type of team over in the EPL. I don't know, Crystal Palace or somebody came up and said, we want Weston McKennie. Now, you're going to the EPL, you're playing in England, you're playing in the EPL, but is that a move that you want to make? And I'm not discarding the as I said, the cachet and how strong that is just for players to get to the EPL. But these are the types of decisions that are going to be made. But to answer your question, someone like Weston McKennie, without a doubt, would be, I think, if you put your money, that next potential move, because the circumstances are such that I think it's in the cards and on the table right now for him. I don't know, Mosse, you got anybody out there that, as Gio Reyna starts to progress, that could be another one. But right now, I think Weston McKennie much more so than anyone else.
Yeah, of the guys that are in Europe already, I would say McKennie and Adams are next in line. Is there somebody in MLS, like a Miles Robinson or somebody that screams at you Premier League potential, that could potentially make the move from MLS straight to the Premier League and do well?
I mean, it's hard, once again, with the work permit type of situation, a Jordan Morris type of situation. We've talked about, what's his name? Miguel Almiron, Miguel Almiron has done, and that pathway. And certainly I think if you're, a Pity Martinez or something like that, you might be looking at that as a possible trailblazing move that you can follow out there. But, when it comes to American players, like I said, there's just realities as to the difficult nature of making that move right now. And I don't see a lot of players that are just so good right now that they would immediately be, it's not that they wouldn't be successful. It's that it's much more so the way that they are looked upon, and therefore if they are coveted by anybody out there. And I don't think there's a lot of interest when it comes to players, when it comes going to directly to the EPL from MLS.
One player who made the move from the Bundesliga to the Premier League and is now coming back to the Bundesliga is Leroy Sane, and that leads nicely into the next. It's not really a question; it's a statement, but it enables us to talk about one of the great bits of news from the last week. At BW Holmes 03, Bayern Munich got Leroy Sane, and I couldn't be happier. So I'm presuming this is a Bayern Munich fan.
Has his time abroad been a failure? If you look at Leroy Sane.
No, I would say it just got derailed by injury, which, you look at this transfer fee, and there's two ways to look at it. Last summer, Bayern were reportedly offering like 100 million euros. City said no. They held on to him. He gets injured during the Community Shield, doesn't contribute at all this season. And now they're selling him for half the price. So City have been mocked by that. And how terribly they played this whole thing. But if you look at it just in the context of this summer, and you consider the fact that Leroy Sane would have been entering the last year of his contract, he wanted to leave, he's coming off a major injury, and we are dealing with this sort of pandemic market, 50 million euros with add-ons that are probably going to take it up to 60 million euros is actually not a terrible amount for City to get for him right now. I will say, though, from Bayern Munich's perspective, it is a phenomenal move. If he stays healthy, he's going to just absolutely tear it up, serving up balls for Lewandowski next season. I think this is Bayern's big move. They would love to get Kai Havertz, but they're hoping that Leverkusen hold on to him for another year because they don't want to sell him below value because of the pandemic market right now. And so they're hoping that Leverkusen hold on to him for another year. And then next summer, that would be their big move to try to get Kai Havertz. The other interesting part of this whole story is I mentioned last week that the way for these Bundesliga clubs to compete with Bayern is they're going to have to become destination clubs and convince players to stay. Rummenigge kind of said the same thing. He twisted the knife a little bit on Schalke because remember, Leroy Sane is a Schalke player, left to go to City, and now he's ending up back in the Bundesliga with Bayern. And Rummenigge was sort of musing on like, boy, look at all the players that have come through Schalke in the last 15 years. Neuer, Ozil, Gundogan, Sane, Goretzka, Meyer, Matip. And he said, if they had held on to all those guys, they probably could have competed with us and won Bundesliga titles, but they didn't. So, it's a little bit of an obnoxious observation by the Bayern Munich chairman, but nevertheless, he made it. Yeah,
and it's easy to spend or save other people's money from the outside. Well, maybe Mosse, maybe it's that Leroy Sane, maybe Leroy Sane just wants to play Champions League soccer, and he's hedging his bets right now.
I mean, that is no. That's
hey-o! We don't know what's going to happen with that, so it's going to be interesting. And there's a judgment, I guess, or a ruling that's going to come out here very soon that's going to tell us if Manchester City is going to be involved in Champions League going forward. So we'll see with that. One more of these, right? There's one more Ask Alexi. What do we got?
On this? This is a fella, by the way, Alex Goldstein 87, who tweets questions constantly at me, and I do my best to answer all of them. I mean, it's a lot. He tweets me a lot with questions. And this was the most recent one he asked, and I hadn't gotten around to answering it yet. But luckily, Alex Dowd threw it in the rundown this week. So, Alex Goldstein, if you're listening, this sort of counts as my answer to this question. I'm not going to also answer it on Twitter. So, at Alex Goldstein 87 asks, which international league, I think he means region, which international region do you see winning a World Cup first? CONCACAF, Africa, or Asia? Which country from each respective league do you see winning a World Cup first? Hashtag Ask Mosse, hashtag Pergunta Mosse, which means Ask Mosse in Portuguese.
Ooh, nice. Okay, so I think we've had this. We haven't, but I've heard this question before, and it's an interesting one. Obviously, all three confederations, while sending teams for years and years to the World Cups, have never even really come close to winning a World Cup. I think if I had to put my money on it, I'm going to put my money on Africa. I mean, I think they have more teams that are capable of doing something magical. Okay. And that's what you need. Okay. It's not as if there's a golden generation that is going to do it, just walk through a tournament. They're going to have all of the stars aligned, and you have more teams out there that have consistently showed glimpses that they could catch fire and do something. And you have your usual suspects, whether it's, Ghana and Nigeria. But, over the years, teams like Senegal and teams, Ivory Coast and different teams, whether it's Algeria or Egypt, or these types of teams that have come through. So I would say that, Africa I would see first. Second, it's a toss-up between the two. I mean, look, when you're talking about CONCACAF, notwithstanding the fact that the U.S. didn't qualify for the last World Cup, I would still say that with history, you're looking at the United States and Mexico as potentially catching fire and doing something. He might throw no, I'm not going to throw anybody else in there. So that's those two. And one of those teams didn't even qualify for the last World Cup. It doesn't mean they can't go on to do great things at the next World Cup, but that's legitimately two. And then when it comes to Asia, right, was the other one that we were talking about?
Yep.
I mean, geez. I mean, yeah, I mean, I would still put it Africa, Asia, CONCACAF, as much as it hurts me to say. But as I said before, these teams would have to have the perfect group setting. They would have to have everything go their way. A red card here, or an own goal here. They would have to have that perfect pathway to it, and then catch lightning in a bottle, like I said. So yeah, that's who I would say if I had to put money on it. What about you, Mosse?
I'm going to take a more macro view of this question.
Okay.
One of the great paradoxes is that soccer, when you look at the randomness of an individual soccer game, you would think that any knockout competition in soccer would sort of lend itself to Cinderella teams winning, or at least having a chance to get hot and bounces go their way. And yet in the 90-year history of the World Cup, we have never had anything even resembling like a Cinderella champion. Only 8 nations have won the World Cup. Right. Brazil, Germany, Italy, Argentina, Uruguay, who won it when they were an absolute powerhouse in the first half of the 20th century, won it twice. France, who have won it twice, Spain and England. And if you look at the circumstances in which each of those countries won it, they were like one of the best teams, and in England won it at home. Spain won it in 2010 when they were the best team and the favorites going in. France won it at home in 98, and then again, the last one. And so the way I interpret this question is, I don't think a country's just going to get hot and win it sort of out of nowhere. I think winning a World Cup will be the natural consequence of emerging as one of the elite soccer nations. So if you look at all the different countries in CONCACAF, in Africa, and Asia, it's like which one has a realistic chance to, at some point in the future, emerge as one of the elite nations in this sport. And I have to say, I'm not just pandering, I would say it's the United States. I think there's the most upside there, the most runway still. I feel the greater sense of like, if each of these countries gets it completely right, like what does that look like? And I think in the United States case, it does look like someday down the road in the future, there's no guarantee the U.S. is going to get there, but there is a world in which the U.S. completely figured out how to maximize its potential here as a soccer nation, in which the U.S. emerges as one of the elite countries. And then that day you could think about, winning World Cup. So I would go with the U.S.
It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard you say, Mosse. Oh my goodness! All right, well that is wonderful. All right, anything else from Ask Alexi?
No, that is it.
All right, well we come to the end of yet another show here, and at the end of each and every show, I give you my one for the road. And obviously, this past weekend was July 4th, Independence Day. Happy birthday to the United States, a country I love, and a country that I feel is the greatest country in the world, not without problems and not without challenges. But I think back to July 4ths of the past, and one of them looms large. In July 4th, 1994, obviously the summer of the USA World Cup that yours truly was a part of. On July 4th, up in Stanford, in Northern California, we played Mosse's Brazil. Right? It's really Mosse's USA and Mosse's Brazil, but we played Brazil, a Brazil team that went on and won the World Cup in 1994. It was was to be the last game of our little adventure when it comes to the United States national team. We ended up losing 1-0 on a goal from the great Bebeto, and we left the tournament. But we left the tournament with our heads held high. And there's certain things from that day that I remember. Obviously, it was a epic type of day, being July 4th. Huge Brazilian audience, huge United States audience. And, the game was, and there's a whole lot of things that we could talk about, including Tao Bramos getting knocked out and that whole moment. But I also think about after the game, the post-game party up there. And so my one for the road, this is to tell you about that post-game party, which was full of so many different people and all walks of life. And, as we mentioned, we were done in that tournament. So there's an element of sadness in that this run has come to the end, but also an element of incredible and immense pride for what we had left and what we had done for the game. We knew that we had done something that was good, that was positive. and we also knew that going into the tournament, we could have really, the bed and not put ourselves and our sport in the best light. And so this after party we were commiserating that we had done, but it was much more about a celebration of everything that had happened. And not just it happened on the field, but everything that had happened so far in that World Cup and how our country and culture had changed because of that World Cup. I vividly remember the late, great Robin Williams coming into our part of this. We had booked out this big restaurant, and our part of the restaurant coming in and talking to us and telling us how proud he was and how much he loved watching us. I vividly remember that. I also vividly remember after we had finished eating, we all went out to the bar, which was what we normally did. And I remember moseying up to the bar and being surrounded on both sides by two members of Metallica and doing shots of tequila and Jägermeister with James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich from Metallica. And for me, after having gone through this incredible adventure and wonderful things that had happened during the World Cup, that for me was a memory that I will never, ever forget. It was a wonderful way to kind of end my tournament, because my life would never be the same after that. So there's your one for the road. We had more than one, by the way, for the road. We had plenty more. That was back when they were drinking. But I've forgotten a lot about the 90s. A lot of it is hazy, but I distinctly remember that moment when, having grown up listening to Metallica, I was flanked on either side by members of Metallica doing shots and celebrating the game and celebrating life. It was, despite the loss that day and despite the fact that we exited the tournament, it was still a very, very good day. Mosse, anything to say to the folks before we head off into the great blue yonder?
You brought it up, so one quick thought on that game. Romario has, a lot of players have changed their games as they've gotten older, but Romario hung on for so long that the second part of his career, that became the image of him as a player. And when you ask anybody to describe Romario as a player, you get this sort of second part of his career description, which is a guy that wasn't all that involved, was just kind of a crafty goal scorer who was in the periphery of the game, would just pop up and score goals. And people forget that there was a whole first part of his career where Romario was a much more explosive, dynamic player than people realized when he first came up with Vasco and all those years with PSV, and even that 93-94 campaign with Barcelona, where he would drop back deep, pick up the ball, and go on these darting runs. And you bring up that very goal. I mean, that's how that goal came about. He picked up a ball in the midfield and went on this darting run and blew past a couple defenders and rolled it across to Bebeto to score. And so I've always thought that Romario has been kind of lost in history a little bit. People now only remember that sort of in the box predator that just had a knack for being in the right place at the right time and was a really crafty finisher. But he was a fantastic all-around striker in the early part.
He did it multiple times in that game. And for any center back, regardless, but in particular for a center back that, as I've said many, many times, was not the fleetest of foot, it puts you in a situation where you have to make a choice. Do you follow him or you just let him go? The problem is if you follow him, there's a huge space that opens up behind you. But if you don't, he has the ability to get the ball, turn, and now it's not just Romario running at you, it's Romario running at you with space and speed and deceptive speed. And so I got beat at different times in that game by doing both things. Once where I let him go and he would turn and run at me, and even at times going with him because that opened up space behind. But that's what great players do. They can beat you multiple ways. And we had our hands full with that team. We had our hands full from a defensive standpoint, marking Romario and Bebeto. That Bebeto scored that goal should have been no surprise. They had plenty of opportunities. We did have some opportunities, but the better team won that day. And look, if you bomb out of a, well, not bomb out of a world, if you exit a World Cup losing to the eventual champs, there's no shame in that. And thankfully, we have gone on to much bigger and better things. But it was a wonderful time in my life, and one that I think of fondly. And that day, that July 4th game, people still talk about and people still ask me about. All right, Mosse, always a pleasure to hang with you, my friend. I hope you and yours are doing well. I hope everybody out there that is watching, that is listening to the podcast is doing well, that you're staying safe and that you are staying sane. Thank you so much for the downloading and the reviewing and the recommendations and the subscribing that goes on when it comes to the State of the Union pod. We thank you so much for hanging with us as we go through and muddle through all of these interesting times that we are living in. We will talk to you again next week. And as always, size the day. You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops every week. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.